Good afternoon, members. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to start with prayer, and the Honorable Leader of the Opposition has agreed to do the prayer for the committee. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Thank you, sir. Let us pray. Father, we invite your presence here as we convene this Finance Committee of the Parliament of this country. Father, as we deliberate and examine the appropriations being sought by the government, I pray that we will all work together to understand what is being requested, that we might always make the right decisions and those decisions that are in the best interest of the people of these islands. We pray your blessings upon us this afternoon as we deliberate and ask you to always be with us and watch over us and care for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Please be seated. Good afternoon, members. We have a quorum, so we can commence. The quorum for the committee is 10 members, not including myself. We now have 10 members here, so the committee is quorate. The purpose of this meeting is to consider items shown on the hard copy material that has been distributed to all honorable members. This committee, the approval that we're looking for is being sought under Section 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act. And as members will know, we can always have a committee meeting outside the Parliament itself actually sitting. We have a very short schedule. And again, I want to thank everyone for attending on this short notice. Kind of moved it ahead of where we were from next week, so that's actually pretty good. We will start, just before we get into it, I just want to know that the items that we have included on the schedule have actually been included in our forecast. What I can say to the members is that, one, based on these items that we're approving today, we will still be compliant with all elements of the FFR, and we're still in a slightly break-even position, so we're still okay at this point. So no one has to worry about any ratios being breached as a result of where we are right now. So as members would have been known, which would have been in the public domain, the government is still in a surplus position. Revenues are actually trending better than we expected. We still have costs contained. So from that standpoint, we're not worried at this point, but nonetheless, as the Premier said, we have to remain financially prudent. It is still early days. We still have challenges of the tourism industry in terms of that recovery and everything else. And as such, again, I just want to thank all my colleagues for working, and especially the civil service, in terms of keeping the costs down at this point. With that said, I'm going to start with the first item on the schedule, which is EI-89, the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company Expansion Project. And the amount that's being looked for is $5,350,000. And this is to fund the expansion plans of the Cayman Islands National Insurance Company, which include the establishment of a local provider network, the expansion of current health insurance products, and the expansion into property and casualty insurance as auto and residential insurance. With that said, are there any questions? Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, can we get a breakdown of how the actual 5.3 million will be utilized?
Thank you kindly, sir. Mr. Michael Gale, who is the Chief Executive Officer of CINICO, I'll ask him to take the chair. And Mr. Gale, just before you answer the question, can you just state for the record your name and title for the records?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm Michael Gale. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of CINICO. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the leader, the bulk of that amount is to provide the capital required for our venture into the property and casualty segment of the business. The expansions in the health sector are largely able to be covered by our existing capital structure, but in order to delve into property and casualty, we need a certain amount of capital to satisfy CIMA solvency requirements and also to provide support for the reinsurance program, which we'll be using to provide the government with the greater protection.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Chairman, through you to the CEO. I take it then CIMA have set what those capital requirements need to be in order to obtain the necessary licensing?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as regards the discussions with CIMA, we are in a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation, in that until such time as everything is approved and we have a formal business plan presented to them, we can't get a firm fix. However, we have engaged them with considerable dialogue. We have given them projections, and they have indicated that the figures that we have put forward, including this amount for which approval is being sought today, will satisfy the solvency requirements.
Okay, so you suggested then that, through you, sir, that the bulk of this is going to capitalize CINICO. Round numbers, what's the amount going to for the capitalization?
So
to meet those solvency requirements.
In terms of the solvency requirement, again, we have not received, my apologies, through you, Mr. Chairman, we haven't received a firm number from CIMA. We did get a template on which we could base our calculations, and our calculations suggested that somewhere in the region of appreciably less than the $5 million would satisfy the solvency requirements. However, because it's a startup operation where the expenses are front-loaded, there is anticipation that the capital would be eroded for the first year or two. So we had to have provisions for that. We included a discussion on those provisions in our discussions with CIMA, and they were quite satisfied that the $5 million is more than adequate.
Okay. And what are your plans with regard to, or sort of timeline, I should say, through you, Mr. Speaker, to Mr. Chairman, through to the CEO, what is the estimated timeline for the commencement of offering of these additional products?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, our timeline at the moment, we're looking at 1st of January. We have already started a lot of the legwork in anticipation of the ultimate approval. We have received support from Cabinet, but we recognize that we cannot enter into any contractual obligations until the entire approval process is completed. But we have done quite a bit of the background legwork. We are fairly far advanced in that regard, and we are confident that barring some unforeseen circumstances, we will be ready to launch these new products in January.
And can you give us a little bit more detail then, sir, through you, Mr. Chair, with regard to the types of what those products are going to be?
So initially, Mr. Leader, through you, Chair, We are starting with residential insurance and homeowners insurance aimed primarily at public servants for the first few years. One of the reasons for this is there is a recognition, for example, that the private insurance sector plays a very important role in our economy, employs a lot of Caymanians, and provides a lot of support, and it is not the government's intention, as far as my understanding is, to undermine the private sector. So we are simply offering alternatives, and in addition to offering these alternatives, we are sort of constrained by external factors such that it is desirable that we have slow, controlled growth rather than trying to be too big too quickly. So that is basically the plan.
Mr. Leader? Oh.
Yes, I was just thinking you talked about as well here in the description, sir, the establishment of a local provider network and an expansion of current health insurance products. I think you only spoke to the residential, property and casualty side of it. Can you speak as well to the others?
Through you, Chair. Apologies for that, Mr. Leader. I was responding specifically to your questions about the capital, where the bulk of the capital is to do with the property and casualty side. But as far as the health side is concerned, a general gap in available health products has been identified between the more comprehensive products, which are quite costly, and the standard health insurance contract, which offers very small outpatient benefits. So we are currently in discussion with our actuaries to try to identify a suitable balance between expanded cover in that range and affordability, which will enable us to provide a more affordable option for younger Caymanians, people just out of school, who typically as a body have less health concerns, and also the younger work permit holders who are coming into our islands, who by definition, having had to pass medicals, themselves are also more healthy. So we are looking at trying to identify a product in that area. Now, as CINICO is not currently an open market insurer, we are transitioning into open market. And as a part of that, we will be establishing a preferred provider network, which will be available to those who are purchasing this new product. We have also heard the cry of our civil servants who, for a number of years, have been crying for the opportunity to choose their suppliers, their providers, other than being compelled to go to HSA. So we will be offering this facility to members of the public service currently covered by us to utilize the preferred provider network. There is a caveat to that, in that the access to the preferred provider network will be on a similar basis to private insurers, whereby the participants will be obliged to bear a portion of the cost, typically 20% of the cost, whereas if they go to HSA, we will continue to cover it 100%.
One of the things, Mr. Leader, which I just want to expand on a little bit, and just looking back at the annual report for CINICO that I tabled earlier today, and I just want to make a comment which was also included, which may probably shed some light on the issue. And I'm just going to read a section of the message that I included in the report. It says, with expenses totaling $111.5 million, CINICO achieved a net profit of $1.4 million for the 2021 financial year. On a line of business basis, the civil servants, SAGCs, and civil servants pensioners business segments earned surpluses, with the seafarers and veterans and standard health insurance plan reporting losses of $0.3 million and $2.1 million respectively. In short, Mr. Leader, one of the things that we're looking at, and as members of this committee will be aware, the purpose of insurance is to spread risk. And what we have now is a situation where a lot of the older people within our communities are going to CINICO at this age and stage in their life where the healthcare cost is the most. And we have a situation where, looking at this, where just for 2021 alone, the SHIC plan cost the government $2.1 million. And what we have is a situation where CINICO is taking on all the, pretty much the high risk components of our community, and we're not spreading that risk. So the idea is to, at least if we can expand the network, say exactly how we can spread risk, where even though we made a profit of 1.4 million, we could have done better. And in essence, it is really the civil servants or the public servants that is actually subsidizing the SHIC plan to some extent. So the whole idea is to see what it is that we can do in terms of expanding the offerings in that regard, because we do have a situation where a lot of our seniors, especially our people living longer, not being covered. So the idea is to bring in a plan. I know you guys that look at doing the SHIC 65 plan the last time around, and this is how this thing started, but we wanted to make sure that we brought on enough younger people or have a plan in place to bring it on to actually offset the losses that would have been incurred on the other side. So that's really, but the capital is for the new stuff, but we do have sufficient capital on the healthcare side.
I do appreciate those comments, Mr. Chairman. And I mean, in terms of the SHIC, that's always been the case, because even from my time there, I mean, government always loses money on that, because what happens is that when it comes to the SHIC program, the private sector refuses to take on a lot of these risks, and it then falls to CINICO. And I guess a concern that I would have with us expanding into the open market is that could very well be the similar situation if we're not careful, that private sector insurers don't particularly want to take on some of these risks, so they are then forced to come and take up, for CINICO then to take up and offer these higher levels of coverage and insurance. And instead of spreading risk, you're just taking on more losses. That I see as a risk in this whole program once you start entering the open market.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may comment on that. So there is a material difference between CINICO and the open market and how CINICO currently operates. How CINICO currently operates, we do not have the ability to discriminate, to differentiate as far as what comes in. There is a funnel. Everything that comes in through the government comes to us, or with the SHIC policies, we don't have an option. Anything that comes through the door, we're pretty much obliged to write it, as I might add, as all the Class A insurance companies. However, with the open market product, we will have the same ability to underwrite it as the private carriers do. So in the event that there is a proposal which from a medical or other point of view is unsatisfactory to us, we will decline it or rate it appropriately. We have the same safeguards that the private sector will have in that regard. And if I may, Mr. Leader, through you, Chairman, just to add one other point regarding the private network. There is traditionally, and with good reason, concern about the high cost of health insurance premiums. Health insurance premiums are a symptom of the high cost of health insurance. It's an equation. On one side, you have the cost of health care, and on the other side is the funding of the health care, which is the health insurance premiums. The cost of the premiums can't be addressed without addressing the high cost of health care. Now, through our provider network, we are going to be negotiating discounts, and the willingness to provide these discounts will be a condition precedent to participation in the network. We currently cover somewhere in the region of 25% of the population between the direct clients and the indigents, and that number will grow as we go into open market. So we will have the ability to influence prices to a very significant degree. And it is our hope that our ability to do so will manifest itself in some amount of moderation of the costs of healthcare being rendered, even for those who are not in the network. Because if word comes out that Dr. A is charging $100, whereas Dr. B usually charges $150, some of Dr. B's clients are going to go to Dr. A. So we are actually quite optimistic that an additional benefit, which will inure to the benefit of the entire country, not just to CINICO and to our particular members, it will have a moderating effect on the increase in health insurance costs. On healthcare costs. And by definition, also, that should manifest itself in some moderation in health insurance costs over time.
Thank you for that explanation and for the clarity. And based on giving my other colleagues a chance.
Mr. Chairman.
Member for West Bay West.
Mr. Chairman, what kind of time frame is being set to bring in these new products, such as the ability to do property?
Mr. Chairman, sorry, Mr. Gill.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we are seeking to be able to start those off in January of next year. Both the property and motor, and also the new health insurance products. And there is a second dimension to the health insurance products where we are also working on a product, a more affordable product for retirees, which will follow sometime after the introduction of the initial product, when we've had a chance to settle into our new dispensation as an open market insurer. But we're working on that simultaneously.
As a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, but I didn't catch the name of this gentleman, but
Gail.
Michael Gale, sir.
Gail, can he, Mr. Chairman, shed any light on where or how they will be addressing some of the issues that are being faced now by people that have property insurance, where the companies, for instance, set these deductibles. And every time something happens, you go to them and they tell you, no, sorry, you haven't reached the amount. And it's happened to me. I know it's happened to many other people. Happened to me twice in these last hurricanes. Well, where mine was, they set it at 31,000. And mine, they said, oh, it's 18,000 twice. The hurricane this year, and then the one before, the hurricane last year, and the one before that, and we had that weather. And not for hell's sake could I get that company. Mind you, Mr. Chairman, we have companies that are good, solid private sector companies. But this situation here, it seems to be that the companies set these deductibles. And when you get close to it, the goalpost slips a little bit further. They're worse than the OECD.
Mr. Gill.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I may just make a slight correction to what the honourable member has said. The deductibles are set by reinsurers. The private companies operating here do not have enough capital to carry all of the risks, and therefore are obliged to carry reinsurance. Because we are in a catastrophe-prone region, the reinsurers set deductibles in order to reduce their exposure. So, to a very significant degree, that is outside of the scope of the local insurance companies. Having said that, we are looking at something which may bring a little relief in that area. It's premature for me to say anything about it at this stage. If you'll permit me, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to say, watch this space.
I'm not going to prolong the debate, Mr. Chairman, but be you sure, and I think you well know yourself, Mr. Chair, that these are things that are, and we quite understand about their costs. But for certain, the cost is not cheap for us, and you pay for years and years and years, and you don't have a claim. I've been in my house for 6 years. And you can't get them to, at some point, give some kind of payment, some kind of consideration. You're paying $17,000, $18,000 a year. They're not broke companies. And while I understand about reinsurance, because I used to be in the market too, so just in case you don't know, I wasn't a politician all days of my life. And so, Mr. Chair, I hoped that we can somehow look at how these deductibles are set.
Mr. Chairman, I think as the CEO said, watch this space. Are there other questions? Mr. Leader?
I do have one more, sir. Through you to Mr. Gale. Mr. Gale, have you or has your board also considered maybe any possibility of offering some type of life products? Specifically thinking of something like mortgage life insurance, which I think is something that could be quite profitable for CINICO if they were to engage in it.
Through you, Chair, Mr. Leader, there are a lot of insurance products which we could possibly offer. We are constrained by, shall we say, internal resources, and there is a limit to what can be done in any finite time frame. I will confess that the expertise of my team and myself lies within the area of property and casualty and health insurance. We do not currently have any exposure, any expertise in life insurance, so that is not something that we would be venturing into in the short run. It does remain a possibility for CINICO to explore at some point in the future, but my counsel would be small steps. Let's get things bedded down and sorted out, and then we look to expand in due course.
And I understand that, sir. Thank you, sir. No further questions from me.
Any other questions? If not, I'll take the vote. All those in favor of EI 89 Cayman Islands National Insurance Company Expansion Project in the amount of $5,250,000 for 2022, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no? The ayes have it. Thank you very much, Mr. Gale. Colleagues, we're moving on to the next item, TP 109, Extraordinary Relief Stipend, in the amount of a supplementary funding for $1.5 million. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Member for West Bay West.
There is, I don't know what the problem is. I know that government hears about it or gets the same complaints that I get, that some people who were told they would be getting haven't got at the time, and everybody has got their stipend at the time it was being paid. I mean, as I said, I know I got several of these kind of complaints, and I don't know whether you all are getting them or not, but that is happening. I don't know what's the reason.
Can I get Mr. Chief Officer Wesley Owell seated so he can answer your question, please? Mr. Owell, before answering or responding to the member from West Bay West, can you just state your name and title for the records, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Wesley Howell, Chief Officer for the Ministry of Border Control and Labor. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the stipend payments have been qualified around a number of surveys and questionnaires to recipients in an effort to ensure that individuals are still in need of the stipend and not necessarily just want the stipend. And also, we also made some checks in relation to anomalies, several of which have been referred to the police for investigation, where the evidence appears that folks have been defrauding the government by entering into information that is not accurate. So in some cases, delays are based on the fact that those payments were held up where the evidence is such that the police were involved and those investigations are ongoing. In other cases, persons neglected to fill out the surveys in a timely manner, which meant that their payments were not dispatched. We would want to have information from individuals as to what their need is to ensure that we weren't not simply spending the government's money where there was no need.
Mr. Leader.
Yes, sir. Just to Chief himself, through you, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the number of cases that have been turned over to the police. I mean, can you just give this committee an indication of just what are the numbers looking like?
Mr. Chairman, we have about a dozen.
We know the dozen, but the investigation's ongoing, so there could be.
Mr. Chairman, we have about a dozen persons whose submissions are under investigation. But as we comb through the information, we are actually utilizing a forensic auditor to look through the submissions. We may uncover some additional ones.
And can you also, through you, sir, can you also give us indication how many people actually still receiving the stipend?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the numbers for May were 3,202, which is down from 3,621 as of the 1st of January this year.
And through you again, sir, to the chief, and they're receiving what, is it $750 a month? Or some still receiving the 1,500? Of
that 3,202, 2,242 are full, received the 1,500, and 960 received the 750.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I guess then, try to understand how the number is 1.5 million. How do we get there, given the large numbers that are still receiving the stipend?
So, Mr. Chairman, as I set out in the documents that I believe the members may have, the initial appropriation for 2022 was $10,319,000, to which we had an initial Section 12 supplementary of 15 million, and with the additional 1.5 million now, we see us going through to 26,819,000, which takes us through to the end of June, which is the period for which the government was committed to continuing the stipend.
So, and just through you, sir, just for clarity then, there is no funding beyond the end of this month, am I right?
This ministry.
Okay.
What I can say, Mr. Leader, just to add on, is that from the survey results, we do recognize that there are some people that will require assistance post-June. We have already started with the Ministry of Social Development, where we're working now to transition the program over to the Ministry of Social Development, where they will then continue on now. So all of the underlying issues that needs to be dealt with will now go to the Ministry of Social Development as opposed to the Ministry of Border Control and Labor. So in a nutshell, just to summarize, the people that will still require assistance, the assistance will continue, except it's going to be continued in a different ministry that is actually designed for a lot of these programs. What I can say from speaking to the minister is that we are working out or still fine-tuning the way in which we want to move it, because one of the things that we are conscious of, and we have seen what happened in the United States, is that there's a difference between people who temporarily need assistance versus people who need welfare. And what we don't want are people changing their mindset from work to welfare, because once that mindset changes, it's very hard then to move them back to a different to a different category. So there are certain things that have been worked out where it's going to be treated slightly different. But the minister is here at a minimum. Maybe it'd probably be easier for him to shed some light on that. I don't know, Minister Ebanks. Well, Andre Ebanks got it to them. Can just at least give a little bit of brief comments on that one.
I think you set out the current line of thinking. My only comment is that we'll still require supplementary funding in this ministry, which is, I anticipate, your next question.
That would have been my next question. No. Through you again, too, sir. I mean, we're transitioning this now from your ministry into his ministry, which Community Affairs. Will the funding continue at the same level for those on this program now, or will it switch over to the programs that he provides or that he has fund? See where I'm going with the question?
I suspect that it will continue at the same level. It's just the management, because at the end of the day, I mean, they started with the Ministry of Tourism, and now that tourism is, their team had capacity before when it started. And from that standpoint, we expected this to have been short term. We're, again, if not for Omicron, during the first part of the year, pushing the tourism, reopening everything backwards. But if for my staff, in terms of my ministry, it's still a small ministry, and it still takes up a considerable amount of resources. So the ministry that actually has the wherewithal and the resources to manage this program is best in terms of social development. So the whole idea is to still continue to assist our people, but from the Ministry of Border Control and Labor standpoint. Now, this is to say, what I can also add, Mr. Leader, is that we also have separate programs within the Ministry of Labor where with training development and people also receiving assistance. So we have started some programs already, which you probably would have seen in the press, where people are getting some technical training and we are providing assistance to them. So some people have transitioned into that program, which will then remain under the Ministry of Labor, but those are like TVET type programs where they're receiving a stipend, getting certification and getting certain qualifications. So that program will continue to run for us. But in terms of people who need a specific need itself, then we'll go to the ministry. And just to add, it will be managed at the ministry level in social development, from what I understand, and not at the NAU level. Because like we said, there's a certain mindset in terms of going to NAU versus dealing with the ministry, and this will be managed at the Ministry of Social Development. The advantage is that the government has already budgeted funds both this year and next year in terms of assistance. So if need be, as we go through the last survey and see exactly what the exact need is, if needs be, there's also the option of maybe bringing forward funds from next year's budget to assist until we have the next finance committee, and then we can quantify the exact amount that would be needed.
Again, thank you, sir, for that clarity. And then a question then directed back to Chief Howell. What's this actually costing us a month?
Mr. Chair, just before, if we could freeze that question, I just wanted to elucidate on one little matter you mentioned.
Sure.
It might help the members. So just to amplify the answer, there's already a body of work between the Ministry of Social Development and the Ministry of Labor to really dissect the population so that you're able to identify those who are able-bodied and ready to work who just maybe need a minimum level of assistance and aren't necessarily NEU social development cases that are handled at the ministry level. And then those who there's maybe a more underlying social issue will be the cases that NEU will adopt, if that helps you.
Thank you very much, Minister Banks. Chief Officer.
Mr. Chairman, through you, sir. The numbers that we have dispersed from January through May, January was 5,459,000. February was, sorry, did I say that? 5,459,000. February was 4,278,000. March, 4,459,750. April, 4,499,500, and May, 4,093,500. So we've seen a decline of over $1 million between January and May as a result of the surveys and individuals indicating that they no longer needed assistance or didn't need the full amount of assistance.
Leader?
I'm just thinking, I mean, it's a relatively small amount that you're seeking with taking only funding up for this program up to the end of June. I mean, we're going to be back here pretty quickly then seeking supplementary for this.
That well, definitely it will require some supplementary, but like I said, from this minister's standpoint, going to the end of June, and like I said, now I have to go through the analysis from the social development side. Like I said, they have more funding available to them that in terms of social assistance to go to the full year. So even if they take it on, they may be able to fund it for the first few months, and then later on in the year, because of using funds for the full year being brought forward. So at least we know we'll be able to cover, but more than likely the short answer is going to be yes.
Yeah, and that's where the question I want to ask, because I mean, you do have next year's funding you could use. Your proposal there is suggesting that you will use that up first before you come back to this house for
well, one of the things that that we want to make sure that the Premier has instructed all ministers is that even though we're using Section 12s now, and because it's early in the year and no one wants to give up their budget, but by the time we look at the half-year mark and going into Q3, what we do expect at a minimum is the request that we have for Section 12, we want to find alternative savings elsewhere. So while it may be still early in the year, the objective is at least to maintain the expenses that we have for the year. So while we have increased the forecast now to accommodate this, the plan is actually to go back and say, well, you know, we see savings. So, for example, just looking at the end of April, just going from memory, personal cost was 10.5 million on the budget. Supplies and consumables 14.5 million on the budget. So that's $25 million saving on 2 line items there. So it has actually, so even though we have spent 10 million more year to date in terms of the stipend and transfer payments, because of the savings elsewhere, we have actually still expenses overall is actually $5 million less. I think like 5.3 million less year to date as to what it is budgeted, but it's a matter of getting rebalancing in. So while we may be overspending in some areas, we see underspending in certain areas, and then the plan then is actually to where we have areas that are underspent is actually just to move the allocations between and actually justify these expenditures at this point.
I would suggest, so you know, we basically are at the half-year point. You know, we ought to have a really decent idea now as to where expenses overall are trending, where the savings truly are. I know particularly things like personnel, that sort of stuff, it's not a straight line. You know, there are delays in recruitment, all sorts of stuff and reasons why. And certainly early part of the year is when you get your greatest savings, but it tends to smooth out and to be consumed over the year. But okay, I mean, I appreciate it, you know, and I know we need to expect that there will be further funding requirements to come for this program.
And I know I can, on behalf of the government, thank your colleagues in anticipation, because we do recognize that, I mean, the challenges still exist, and there will be members in our communities that are still impacted. And what we just need to make sure is that even though we first and foremost have a responsibility to assist them, we just need to make sure that if there are other programs that need to be cut elsewhere or delayed, to pay for it, because we still have to prioritize our expenses. We don't have the luxury of having a blank check. So it's still a matter then of going back now and start cutting back in other areas or push back stuff into later years that are not seen as a priority, because this is actually considered a top priority for the government.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? If not, I put it to the vote. All those in favor of TP 109 extraordinary relief stipend, 1,500,000, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Mr. Waller, I just want to thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Colleagues, next line item on page 4 of the schedule is PAH 14, Management of Planning Application, in the amount of $126,400. Are there any questions?
Thank you, sir.
The leader.
Yes, sir, I appreciate it. You're seeking funding for the amounts that are being paid to Central Planning Authority. I know there was an announcement recently that they had their stipends or the payments made to them for attending to meetings has been increased. Can the committee be given an indication of what those amounts now are?
Honorable Minister for Planning.
Those increase will be for the general members will be 400 per meeting. The deputy chair is 600, and the chairman would be 800, sir.
Thank you, through you too, sir. And basically, the members, that committee meets, that authority, the planning authority, or the planning, central planning authority. That board meets every week.
Honorable Minister for Planning.
Twice a month, right? Yeah, it's twice a month, sir.
Okay, so basically you're looking for the chair getting $1,600 a month, deputy chair getting 12, and just ordinary members getting 800. Am I right? Yeah, thank you, sir.
Other questions?
My other question, just to probe this a little bit further. I do recall from my time there that the deputy governor was doing an exercise to try and, I guess, level the playing field and harmonize the fees being paid to members of all of our boards. Would you know if that has been done and completed, and whether this would meet and was considered in terms of that harmonization?
Thank you, Mr. Leader. What I can say is that the Deputy Governor did do some work on it, and we did review all the boards. There are some boards that basically receive no compensation at all. There are some that we have also since reduced, since taken over. So it is part of the harmonization process to bring them in line in terms of I would not say the risk profile, but in terms of the amount of time and everything that it takes. So we still recognize that it is still a voluntary community service, but at the same time, at least try to at least cover the cost of gas and other different things in terms of time, because some of the people who actually serve are also self-employed people, and they do give up. When they're giving up an entire day or 2 days, an entire month, they do actually feel it to some extent sometimes. But we still want to encourage community service, but at the same time recognize that it is still a voluntary service, but at least to reward people, at least for giving up their time, because public service is still a noble cause.
So if I've heard you correctly, DG has done quite a bit of work on it, but it hasn't yet been finalized. Am I correct?
I think it's very close to finalization, but what we can say, I mean, this one's separately different because it is a CPA, but as required by the Public Authorities Law, all the compensations, everything else for any board members has to also still be approved by the Deputy Governor to make sure that it is, I guess, in line with other boards across. So it is an exercise that's been undertaken. There are some boards we know that will require some supplementary funding and everything else, but we made the decision that rather than, even though these are small amounts, and rather to do this, it probably would have been easier to do 11.5 than to come down here for $126,000, but we think at a minimum it's important that this entire process be transparent, so as the different boards are coming up for additional spending, and you will see small amounts, but at a minimum we think that this is a conversation that should take place in the public space. So, I mean, coming down here for $126,000, people may say it's kind of a little bit moot, but at a minimum, that's what we wanted. But it is part of the harmonization process, and yes, it is also to bring them in line with similar boards that would have been doing similar work.
And this funding that you're seeking, that just takes us through for 2022?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? If not, I put it to the vote. All those in favor of PAH 14 Management and Planning application, $126,400, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Colleagues, we're moving on to the final item, NGS 55, tertiary medical care at various local and overseas institutions in the amount of $8 million. Are there any questions?
You know that, sir.
Mr. Leader.
Infamous NGS 55. for someone without direct knowledge now of how things are working, we approved 21 million roughly for the 2022 budget, now seeking an initial $8 million. We are at the halfway point. All of this 20 million for 2022 now exhausted.
Honorable Minister for Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, we understand that NGS 55, yes, as you quite know, that was one line item in my early days I got to know. But this provides funding, for indigent seafarers and veterans for tertiary care in various local and overseas institutions. In our broad outcomes, number 2, we recognize that healthcare is a basic human right. The cost of healthcare internationally, globally, has gone up, and based on projections provided by CINICO, shows that NGS 55 is projected expenditure reaching pretty much between 38 and 41 million for just 2022. We have seen an increase in this just because of the increased number of indigents since the lockdown, seafarers and veterans, as well as their dependents. But overall, the cost of tertiary healthcare has gone up. In all honesty, we can foresee ourselves, unless there's this huge change in the cost of healthcare, as coming back possibly before the year end, because this has always been one of those appropriations that have been underfunded for years, and we're hoping to change this.
One of the things, Mr. Leader, sorry, I can't say through me, be the chair, but one of the things, as you would be aware, and members would be aware, NGS 55 and HEA2 literally goes hand in hand. And NGS 55, sorry, that's for the listening public, HEA2 vote is for services provided by the Health Services Authority, and NGS 55 are for services that are not provided by the Health Services Authority. So those would be other local hospitals, local doctors, and overseas care. The objective for us really is, as we kind of streamline certain things, is to try to get more business coming into HEA2, which is what it is that we can actually do for ourselves as opposed to going into NGS 55. Now, to answer your question, is it fully exhausted? The short answer is no. But what we can say is that based on what it is that is being approved today, it will at least give us the authority to go through to the summer months. So by the time we meet back maybe around September or so, or October, we may need an additional top-up going into Q4, but this at least should take us over to the summer. So at that point, no one has basically exceeded authority to spend as we go into the summer months, because we suspect we won't be meeting again probably to maybe about September again. So we just wanted to make sure that we at least had enough funds to carry us up to the summer months, and then we can stop to say exactly where we are in the process.
Thank you for that clarity, sir. Then the next question then would be, has any of the 2023 appropriation been transferred into 2022?
As of present, no, not for this vote. We have not looked at that for this vote, because we know if we move it, it's just going to be making it worse for next year. So we're trying to keep it on a year-as-year basis as is. So as the government finances improve, then we'll just take it from this year. But it makes no use to pull it from next year, knowing that next year is going to be short. So we do have the option if needs be, and we did consider that. But at a minimum, we know we're going to need this money. Whether it is today or taking next year's money and put it into this year, we know we're going to need the funds, and we think it would have been the more transparent thing to just come here and ask for it, as opposed to pulling and then going into next year or later down in the year and asking for a whopping amount of money.
Just to get a little bit of a clearer picture, what is the average spend per month on NGS 55? What's it costing us a month?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Let me call my team who's here, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Chief Officer. Acting Chief Officer. Before answering the question, can you just state your full name and title for the record, please? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. My name is Bob Ethel-Garo, Acting Chief Officer, Ministry of Health and Wellness. Through you, Mr. Chair, the average spend per month has been 3.3 million.
Okay, so between 36 and 40 million a year is what this is now mushroomed into.
In line with what the minister said, about 38 million we would expect.
Okay, no further questions from me, sir.
Honorable member for Red Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much a question, but an observation which I think everybody should be aware of. This is an appropriation which is chronically under budgeted. And having been in charge of two governments, I understand all the involved in that. But I think it is time that we become more realistic in the budgeting for this. I don't think there will be any fights from this opposition about, because we are fully aware of how challenging this is. But the bigger picture is that we have to find some way to make handling these sorts of matters more affordable. And thus I truly hope that in the efforts to essentially broaden and redefine the role of CINICO, that we can find something that helps here. I mean, this is not just a Cayman problem, this is an issue throughout the developed world, how we pay for health care, for quality health care.
The government definitely agrees with you in that position, Mr. McLaughlin. And what I can say to you is that one of the things that we are open for is that as we do expand CINICO, is to also have a lot of these people that actually insured, because what you do find is 20% of the people responsible for 80% of the cost, and the majority of the time is always in case of emergencies. So at a minimum, if we at least have many of the individuals insured, at least at some point, as the care exceeds a certain amount, the reinsurance at least can kick in, which will actually reduce the impact to us. So that is part of the overall, not just on the health side, but what the minister is also driving is on the wellness side of things too. Because a lot of these times, if we can start having people within the network where they have at least a doctor getting regular checkup and seeing some of these issues before they can become quote unquote emergencies. So, I mean, as it stands right now, expenses, I think about $550,000, our reinsurance kicks in. You take a situation of a premature baby, which is literally a $2 million hit straight off the bat. Whereas if we had the proper insurance in place for many of these individuals, at least we'd be limited to at least the $550,000, and the reinsurance could kick in for the difference. So it is part of the bigger plan that we're looking at to make sure we manage not just the wellness part of it, but in essence to make sure that, and as part of the wider network is have different doctors assigned to different people. So at least even if it's quarterly or half yearly, getting checkups from that standpoint, and where we can actually see an issue coming before it actually comes, because it is the emergencies that is, if anything, is actually driving the process. I mean, we have people literally looking for an air ambulance to fly off island, and at that point rushing at that point just to get insurance or to get assistance and everything else, when the objective here is to try to be more proactive and reactive in the entire process. But again, it's going to take an overall or a different approach in terms of what it is. So I do completely understand where you're coming from, but if there's any consolation, we have increased the budgeting from the normal 16 million to at least I think it's 21 million that we did for this year. So we do recognize it, we have increased it, but it's one of those that, yes, it is a chronic problem. So I do agree with you in that regard. Are there any other questions, Mr. Leader?
I do have a couple more. Are the health services taking full advantage of the services available locally through Health City, rather than seeking to send people overseas?
Mr. Speaker, through you, I'll ask Mr. Gill if he could please address this question.
Through you, Mr. Speaker,
The speaker sitting beside you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair. I was misled by the acting chief officer. Through you, Mr. Chair, the protocol at CINICO. First of all, let me back up just to make the point that CINICO and HSA work hand in hand as a part of the government's medical and social welfare infrastructure. The protocol for CINICO is all of our members are obliged to refer to HSA as the first point of call. If the service is not able to be rendered at HSA, then we look locally to see whether or not it can be rendered locally. And if it can't be rendered locally, then we look overseas. So the short answer to your question, Mr. Leader, is that yes, we do, through collaboration with HSA, we do utilize Health City services quite a bit.
Mr. Leader.
You say you use it quite a bit. My question was thinking something a little bit more definitive than quite a bit. Are we taking full advantage of it, was my question, before we actually send people overseas for healthcare? Because I know it is far more expensive to send overseas. Are we getting the savings that we could be, or maximizing our savings by utilizing Health City?
It presents, through you, Mr. Chair, it presents a bit of a two-edged sword in that we do utilize Health City as much as possible. But the two-edged sword comes in that what has happened is that the pie has expanded. So whereas somebody whose only option was to go overseas may have determined that they are not prepared to go overseas, but know that the service is available just up the road, they quite happily do so. So even though on a case-by-case basis, we do have the opportunity to save on individual cases, our experience suggests that we are having a higher incidence of referrals to Health City than would have been the case for overseas referrals, just by virtue of convenience.
Okay, that's fine.
Mr. Leader. Any other questions? If not, I put it to the vote. All those in favor of NGS 55, tertiary medical care at various local and overseas institutions in the amount of $8 million, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. And colleagues, going on to the last item, TP 73, other health and wellness program assistance, $474,000. Are there any questions? Mr. Leader.
Yes, sir. The narrative here says that that this is to continue funding the premium payment assistance program that was started at the height of COVID in 2020, seeking an additional $474,000. How many people are actually receiving this assistance?
Honorable Minister for Health.
Mr. Chair, through you, there's an average of 878 to date, but we've had at the highest going back to May of 2021, a total of 1,651 persons that this assisted, and that is the highest from May of 2021. We've noticed since our borders have opened, crews have started back, people have gotten back to work, it has come down significantly.
Yeah, and I can appreciate it based on the numbers that you give us. So on the average, what are the premiums that we paying per person for this sort of stuff?
Mr. Chair, can I seek your indulgence for a more granular level from
Sure, no problem.
my team, please?
Acting Chief Officer O'Garrow.
Mr. Chair, through you, I'll have to seek additional time to get back with the specifics on that. I can tell you how much it is per month on average, but I can't tell you per individual at the moment.
What is it per month on average?
95,000 per month on average, ranging from as high as 173,000 to as low as 67,000.
It has fluctuated between the months.
It has fluctuated. Most recently, that's the lowest rate is average of 67,000, and that's for 670 persons.
Okay, so it's not that you've got a fixed, people, in other words, people are coming on and off the program from month to month if it's varying so much? That fair?
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, it's fair to say that.
Okay.
I think it's probably also the profile too, because I think it depends on the age and everything else. There may be other factors too that would also lend to the movement.
So therefore, at this point, who is eligible for this assistance?
Mr. Chair, through you, I will have to get back with you, but get back to you on the specifics of that as well.
Sorry, but if it's a continuation of the program, I mean, the criteria has not changed since the last go around. So I thought this was just for basically the people who are affected in the tourism industry that's affected because the criteria has not changed. It's just a continuation of the same program.
That's what I would have thought. So too, sir. But I'm a little bit, I wouldn't say surprised, but it's piqued my interest that, you're getting variations. People are coming into and out of the program, month after month.
One of the things I can say, and again, Mr. Lee, just bear me a little bit, because it was going to look at the behavior stipends. We have had people who have been on the stipend program, found employment, in some cases were temporary, where they came off, and then, of course, things didn't work out, and they came back on. So I'm assuming that the behavior may be similar in the sense of some people coming off haven't gotten employment, because once you're employed, the employer does have a responsibility to have health insurance for you. But if it's a situation where they have lost a job or the business has turned out a little bit different, I can see them coming back on. So we have seen that in some cases to the stipend. So I can only assume that the similar profile is also being applied here also. And again, because it's not linear in terms of the costs, because if a person at 55 is coming on versus a person at 25, the health insurance premiums will be slightly different. So I suspect it may be the case, but what I can say, Mr. Leader, and again, I'm assuming that the people who are receiving this coverage is a subset of our wider stipend program. What I can say is that the vast majority of people in the program, that when their situation does change, they're actually honest about it, where they actually come off, because I've seen cases where people have come off and they've come back on. So, I mean, barring the few cases out there, the vast majority of people are good, decent, hardworking people that require assistance. And I've found that the vast majority of them only ask for what it is that they actually need. So I'm assuming that this is the same case where if people secure employment where the employer is entitled or by law required to have health insurance for them, they would need it from government. But if that changes, then they would have to come back on. So I suspect it's the same situation here.
Okay, thanks, sir. Are there people who are receiving this assistance who are also receiving the stipend?
Well, chances are yes, because this would be, again, this is just to cover the health insurance, because at the end of the day, the law does require, in terms of health insurance, that every person should have health insurance. And if people are not working, then they have no employer to give them insurance. And I think, and rightfully, that what you guys did in the last government of recognizing that people will still need health care, and for us to just continue the program in that regard. So it's also to make sure that people who aren't working are still compliant by law, because either way, whether they get it through this program or get it through NAU, they're required by law to have some level of health insurance.
And to you again, sir, then these premiums, therefore, are still being paid directly to the health insurance provider?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Are there any other questions? If not, I put it to the vote. All those in favor of TP 73, other health and wellness program assistant in the amount of $474,000, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. The ayes have it. Colleague,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I had spoke to you in regards to raising a matter, not asking for any money, but to raise a matter. And I need a few minutes to do so. We are all aware, if I can continue, we are all aware of the challenges government face when addressing matters concerning the financial industry, but primarily the banking sector in relation to Caymanians opening accounts, banking fees, and their policies which touch and concern consumers and the bank's customers. I recognize, as several governments had this to deal with, it's been very problematic and a sore issue where many people have expressed concerns. As you are aware, Mr. Chairman, various jurisdictions brought that issue on their national agenda, including CARICOM, heads of state and governments, as well as the senior North American banking executive. Recently, I think the Premier was in attendance there, and I'm also mindful that the Minister of Financial Services has attended various meetings and mentioned the technological advancements and provided updates on pieces of legislation tailored for the global financial services. And so while we have these problems more locally and specifically, we are aware banks are integral to the industry, of course, but they have become heavily regulated by central banks elsewhere. And I am cognizant and aware that we are without a central bank, unlike other islands where they can address concerns of customer, they are addressing or have addressed concerns of customer banks, clients' relationships regarding their user fees. So, Mr. Chairman, it appears that some banks are at times passive or unsympathetic or callous to the pressure and demand, and they need to be more sensitive, as far as I'm concerned, towards the needs of the common person and the average customer, users of their financial institutions. And there is definitely a need for dialogue, which I understand is or will be taking place, and which I strongly have confidence the government is going to do something about it. That will benefit everyone involved. But we also understand banks have costs to recover. We all know that. Even though, for example, the ATM is a replacement for a teller, that we are charged fees to utilize the ATMs, they save money. Perhaps the banks could also at this time consider the different functionalities of the ATMs as in other jurisdictions. I heard the Premier, I heard what the Premier said in his remarks earlier about speaking with the banks regarding their lending terms. So I hope these other fees I have mentioned will gain form part of that discussion. The check is another bone of contention. This includes, but not limited, Mr. Chairman, to depositing checks and the time involved for processing, the difficulties in changing a check which is drawn on a bank of which you aren't a member, even specifically in instances with a government-issued check. You take the government check to the bank the government uses, but that bank won't take it if you don't have an account with them. So, Mr. Chair, there needs to be a discussion on those issues, as does have wider implications on our community at large and cause some unbearable inconveniences many times to many people. The fees in question may be nominal and inconsequential to wealthy people, but it has material effect and impact on the average person in the society. More so is the long lines you endure, and business is business, and if you want to conduct business, well, you got to get in line. But our people are more and more pressured with these fees and the inconvenience that is caused, especially with government checks, where if government uses ABC Bank and you go to the ABC Bank and they tell you you're not allowed to come to me, go about your business. Mr. Chair, I did speak to the minister. I don't know what he would have to say. I'm hoping that in the discussions that the government is having, yourselves, the Premier and others, that some of these things can be raised and that some sort of conscience, or something will strike their conscience. And if not, I mean, legislation is always the last resort, as far as I'm concerned, in some of these things, but something needs to be done. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to raise these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Member for West Bay West. Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly agree with the concerns of the member from West Bay West. As he noted, this is not a recent issue.
No.
It has been one that has been developing over time, particularly in the lengthy, earlier, sort of quite low interest environment that we've had, where banks have found it difficult to make money without having much of a spread. And they've also had the same challenges that we have had as individuals, dealing with growing compliance requirements. And they've been looking to try to offset those costs by implementing charges. I guess we can hope that since the interest rate environment has changed a bit, maybe there'll be less pressure in that respect, and perhaps they may take the view that they can consider reducing some of the costs, some of the fees. But one scenario which is very difficult, and that is a scenario where, as the member has outlined, if you have a check from a particular bank and you go to the bank to get it cashed and they refuse to cash it because you're not a customer, that is a real issue. That has a major impact on people who are unbanked, who have no bank account. We are moving in an environment today where people who have bank accounts are switching over to doing things electronically. Checks are becoming a bygone era. But for those who are unbanked, it is still a major issue. So it is something that I think we should, in any discussions with the Bankers Association, for example, try to get some sort of clarity from their perspective as to how this issue could be resolved for those people in that sort of scenario. I do want to also note that, particularly since the issue has come up in the past, and the question has always been asked as to why the Monetary Authority, Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, as a regulator, is not able to address this issue, and it is not one that they can really deal with without having some sort of clear consumer protection mandate. There is a reference in the legislation for the Monetary Authority Law or Act, which references consumer protection, but it is far from clear that they have a mandate to address those types of issues. So it is really, I think, up to us to have conversations and to try to encourage the members of the Bankers Association to be cognizant of these issues that have real impacts on ordinary people and see what they can do to address them.
Honorable Member for West Bay North.
Mr. Chair, I'm very happy that the Premier just said what he said, because the banks are making the public believe that these rules are being set in place by CIMA. I was in the bank and I heard it firsthand. I took the phone and called one of the senior people at CIMA, and they said they cannot tell the banks what to do. So we must let the public know these are the rules that the banks are making, and I do hope that we can also get that clarified, because we're getting the blame for this. Thank you.
Mr. Leader, you had a comment you wanted to make?
I would just share my own experience, Mr. Chairman, because I tried to address this when I was minister and had discussions with the banks during that time. Particularly, the big issue then was they were charging, $10 to cash a government check, and that's every government check, and a very significant portion of those government checks are payments that are coming through the courts. It might be a $50 here a month in child support or something else, and it was it was creating real hardship. At that time, they were not refusing to cash a government check if you didn't bank there, just they were going to charge you for doing it. And I managed to extract a concession of 3 months grace. But the aim of the banks is that they want to drive everyone onto their online systems. They want to move to, eliminate the tellers, because it is a high cost for them to operate that and to provide that service. So that's what their aim is, and they're trying to. But governments is the primary one dealing with the residents in the country who are unbanked. And so it is, those receiving help financially from the government or through the courts who are receiving payments. And there are other entities where there might be, interaction here with the unbanked, but we're the primary ones that are affected by this. And, I think it behooves us to really try to see what can be done to help alleviate this practice. Because I know government pays our bankers a lot of money in bank charges every month. I know it's going, over the years, it's going to be many tens of thousands of dollars in just pure banking fees. So they get a lot from us, apart from the interest we pay to various banks too on government debt. So we know that there is, and we know, I believe firmly that there is latitude for flexibility on the part of our commercial banks to do this. They don't have to be charging our people and those who can least afford to pay it. One of the things they said to me, if they will only come in, we'll help them open a bank account, and we only charge them $6 a month. We offer a limited service account and only charge that. But try as you might, there are those that are not going to open a bank account. That's just reality.
I believe the Honourable Minister for Financial Services wanted to add a few comments on this issue, and as such.
I don't want to prolong the discussion too long, but I just have some thoughts to share, and to thank Mr. Speaker for raising this. I'm sure he didn't realize it would spark such a vibrant discussion. But I think all the comments so far have generated valid comments. Only thing that I would probably mention is that the banks, Mr. Leader of the opposition is correct that the banks overall do want to move online. And that proposal then, well, you must have seen it, and now I've seen it. With my social development hat, my first question was, well, what will happen to the unbanked? Because it'll be pretty smooth sailing for you and I, but what happens to the unbanked? So the challenge to them right now is to figure out a program that's going to be cost effective and efficient for the unbanked to get that proposal to really work. The Monetary Authority is on board, but they also have the same question: how is this going to work? But the other thing that might be interesting is that there might be answers that we're exploring in innovation to improve payment rails on phones. So individuals, like you say, not everyone will sign up for a bank, as whether or not we can move to more payment wallets on phones, which exist. This is not things that I'm talking about that are in the future. These are things that exist in countries right now, where we might be able to move more mobile payment wallets and increase our technology for those who are unbanked and make things easier, and it's much cheaper. So there are solutions out there that we are exploring right now. Correct. So I don't know if your mic was on, but I'll recap for the public. So your question is whether or not the plan digital ID or national ID, electronic ID will assist. Yes, that's one of the components, is that you'd be able to add your know your customer due diligence on it, so that if you're trying to move money between banks, you don't have to start the paperwork and some of the processes that Mr. Speaker was referring to all over again. It would be stored on the card and the bank would be able to read it.
I just want to thank everyone. I was going to add my comments, but I'll just leave it as is. But what I can say, though, is that it is a challenge, and putting on my hat as a Minister of Labor, as much as we move to automation in many instances, we also need to recognize that automation comes at a price. And I remember several months back just reading an article where they were looking at these driverless trucks. And when you look at the trucking industry across the United States, in terms of the amount of people that it employs, not just the drivers directly, but all the different truck stops along the way where drivers stop to rest and everything else. And when they look at the impact that it would have had on moving to this type of approach, not just the drivers you were replacing, but the different truck stop staff, the waitresses and everything else. I mean, it literally was the amount of jobs that would have been lost just from that automation alone. And while it is fine where we push sometimes to get things automated, we also do need to recognize that everything comes at a price. And in most of the times, the price is at the lower spectrum in terms of entry-level positions. So I just want to put that out there as we push to automation, is to also be cognizant that we have 1,000 young kids every year coming out of school in terms of looking at entry-level positions and everything else. But what I would say is part of our goal, I think, for every member of this House, is to try to find a way where we can encourage more businesses, more investors to come in, where we can actually create jobs, because automation is just a matter of time. And we have seen in other countries now where the term universal basic income is now being batted around, for the simple fact that some countries have positions where can no longer be filled because those entry-level positions are gone. So it's just something to think about, I mean, as we look to the future. Members, I know it's Friday, and we gone a little bit off kilter in terms of what the Finance Committee is about, but I just want to thank everyone for their cooperation today, and to thank Mr. Gale, Mr. Owell, Acting Chief Officer O'Garo. Was there anyone else? In terms of for the testimony and everything else today, and also to the leader of the opposition for his usual professional and understanding way in which he asks his questions. With that, colleagues, Finance Committee is concluded. Thank you all.